Then I hear brr, 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 and I hear grunting. It's coming closer, and I hear crashing coming through. And to see all of that stuff happen, it's just like, man, that's probably the best season I've ever had. Now, did I expect to shoot one on the ground? No.
I was like, well, if I throw a mic on, then I can help others the way that these people have all helped me.
Born in the heart of the Pennsylvania deer camp, with the help of experts, friends, and local legends, we bring you valuable knowledge and powerful stories for your hunting adventures. Welcome to the East Meets West Hunt Podcast with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 400, and I can't believe that we're at 400. Starting this back in 2018, I think the first episode went out on July 1st. Crazy to see that, over 6 years later, still rolling and doing this, and super thankful for everyone that listens to this episode, this podcast week in and week out, and supports this show and all the other content that I put out. It means so much to me, and just can't believe that we're all the way at episode 400 already. That being said, I haven't done a solo episode in a long time. I used to do quite a few solo episodes, other than like the gear talks and stuff, but as far as like recapping a hunt, and I felt like this was a good one to do it on. So just the time I'm recording this is November the 5th, and so it'll go out a week from now, next week. And I had just shot my Pennsylvania buck on November 1st. So filled my Pennsylvania tag the first day of November, and I wanted to recap the season and kind of break it down while it was fresh on my mind, because a lot happened in a short period of time, and I learned a lot from last season. So last season was the first year in a long time that I did not fill my Pennsylvania buck tag, and had a few opportunities and just, screwed them up. And I was, this in the off season, I spent a lot of time trying to hone in on things, and I was really close. There was a few areas that I was hunting that I had spent some years in, spent some time in, but I didn't have it completely dialed. I was seeing the bucks, but they weren't in range, and I just needed to fine tune those setups. And I think that's an important thing to know. I mean, we talk about it on the podcast when I have guests, the importance of choosing the right trees and being in the right spots, but it was really just amplified this year, and I spent a lot of time really picking out those spots. I scout a lot of different areas. I cover a lot of ground, and really going into this, I guess this year, I didn't have, one or two bucks that I was really, really focused on, because I didn't know if they were still alive. So my number one deer from last year has completely vanished. So I'm assuming he got killed during hunting season at some point. But I came into this year with a couple of deer that I figured were going to be really good, this year coming up. But I'm trying to think. I think only one of them I got pictures of during the summertime. So I have to be careful on this episode, because some of these deer are still alive, and there are people that listen to this that hunt some of the same areas and everything. But all I can say is, if you've watched the Mountain Buck Scouting video series from this past year, the episodes that we did, a couple of the places that I was at for those videos, it honestly played out exactly from what the scouting from when we scouted those areas out in the spring, and some of the things that we anticipated happening. And that doesn't normally happen exactly that way, but I put a lot of time into that scouting and really honed in on some particular areas, but wasn't really sure where I was going to hunt. And so I spent most of September into early October out west. So I was out there elk hunting and had a great season out west, the best season I've ever had. but I came back and I felt a little bit behind. But at the same time, I didn't, because I did do a lot of prep work going into it and had cameras in place. Now, this is one thing that I did this year, and cell cameras get a lot of bad rap. It depends. It's like there's two sides of the fence. It's almost like Republicans and Democrats, but the cell cameras, I think, can be such a useful tool, but they can also be used in a way to make you a worse hunter by just relying on those cameras. But what it did in helping me and having those cameras in place really allowed me to be able to know if some of these bucks made it and then where to focus on when I was back. So it's kind of similar, if working a job and you can't get out, just to know that bucks are in an area. And so I had cell cameras in each of the places that I was hunting in the areas, on prominent places, not even necessarily that I would hunt right there, but in places that, whether it be big community scrapes, hub systems, bridges that I wanted to kind of monitor. And I had set up these cameras with a focus on late October and into the rut, because I knew I wasn't going to be back for early season. So it wasn't even in my mind that I needed to worry a whole lot about that first week and a half of October. So I didn't start hunting until probably the 13th or 14th of October. I have to go back and look, but there was a cold front that came through right around that time frame, and that's when I decided I was gonna start hunting. I did some scouting a little bit before that, and I'd come across some areas. There was one area in particular where I started out hunting in October that I didn't even have any cameras at this spot. It was a place that I'd found in the spring that I had a feeling a buck was living in there, because there were so many rubs that were like beech trees that were pretty decent diameter that were just snapped off. I'm like, something big's got to be doing that. And for some reason, I just never got in there to put a camera in. But I was like, all right, during this early part of the year, I'm going to go in and give it a shot. The winds were good, so I scouted my way in on a Sunday and checked it out, and it was just like it was the previous spring, but fresh rubs. And I'm like, okay, there's a buck bedding in here at some point. So when I had the right winds that I needed to be in there, I was going in, and I hunted both mornings and evenings. Not all day. That was early to be doing that, but I went in and I hunted over scrapes that were in the middle of all of this stuff. I had some beds marked, but I didn't know exactly which ones were being used at that time and which ones weren't. I just wanted to put myself in tight with that bedding area, and I felt like my access was pretty good to be able to get in there so I could throw multiple sits at it. And that's exactly what I did. Is I went in there and I hunted over. There was like a double scrape set there that was, the deer were using it. It wasn't a mock scrape. I didn't make it, although I did find a guy's mock scrape pretty close where he was using like a rope and hanging it down, but nonetheless, so I hunted it, and the first 3 days, I didn't see a single deer there. But I was like, there's a buck living here. He's got to be here. I just need to put in this time in here and try it out. More or less, it was kind of something I wanted to test and see. We've talked about the mid-October a lot of times. My trail cameras have shown it, but I hadn't hunted it in consecutive days like that, or spent much time doing it, whether it was when I was working full time at another job, or just that I wasn't in town at that point. But anyways, so on day 4 of hunting in there, I had seen, it was about 8:30 in the morning, and I heard to my left the sound of a deer rubbing a tree, and just like pretty violently. And I look over, and it's only about 45 yards away from me. There was a strip of some newer growth trees underneath the larger canopy that went up through there. And I could shoot right to the edge of it, but inside of it was too thick. And when I looked in there, I could see the beech tree just going back and forth, waving, rubbing. So I look over and I just see a wall of tines that looked like a rib cage that was down there. I was like, holy cow, that deer is huge. And like I said, I hadn't run cameras in there before, so I didn't know what deer he was, which was kind of a cool feeling to be able to have that. But so I saw him. I thought he was going to come up towards the scrape, and he did not. And he just, all of a sudden the sound disappeared, and he kind of just disappeared into the abyss. I tried grunting and nothing, no response there, but had that pretty cool encounter with him in that time period. And I mean, this deer was very, very large just by the look of his frame and the one side of the beam that I could see there. And so I spent the next day, I went back in there again because I couldn't hunt the evening that day. So I went back in the next morning, and this was October 18th. That was the 17th that happened. On October 18th, I was in the tree, and I had heard some more rubbing again, but off to the other side, and this deer had circled downwind of me. I didn't make any noise. I didn't grunt or nothing, but just the way that he was going, he kind of circled around below the bench that I was on and was coming up from it and caught my wind and blew. But that was the day that my cousin Mason shot an absolute giant 12 point. So I got out of the tree and spent the rest of the day helping him pull that deer out of the woods. And I will get Mason on to talk about that story, because Mason is just, anyone that's listened to the podcast long enough knows how consistent Mason is. And he's incredible at the way he looks at the woods, and his setups are very, very unique. And yeah, I'll wait to go into that once we get Mason on the podcast. But so after that, let me see here, look at my notes. So after that, I did put a camera in there. I did not pick up that buck that I had seen. I still don't think I've had him to this point in there, but in other areas, so like I said, I've set my cameras in places that was based off of mid to late October and into the rut. And so those were where I put those cameras, were mostly on scrapes. Some of them were on doe bedding areas. Some of them were in funnels, and other ones were kind of, I'd say, on the edge of where I thought bucks were bedding sometimes, but there was also does nearby as well. So it's kind of a best of both worlds scenario with that. But some deer showed up, some bucks showed up that I hadn't seen since last year, including one that I had a shed off of, and this deer put on more inches than any other deer I've seen put on in the mountains. Like, usually what I see is bucks making jump anywhere from 5 to 12, 15 inches at most. Usually average about 10 inches a year. In the previous year, there's not the food that you get in agricultural areas, so they just don't make those giant jumps typically. This deer put on a ridiculous amount of inches on, and it was just huge. And he showed up on camera once at night, and I was like, all right, game on. And I knew this area pretty well, where does come, there's a doe or two that comes in this one section of the clear cut for the last 3 or 4 years. No, I've ran camera there even longer than that. 4, 5, 6 years, towards that end of October, one of those does comes in, and it's game on in there. So basically, I was playing the weather at that point to move in and hunt that scrape. But what I had learned from last year hunting that scrape was where the scrape is on the edge of the thick cover, but it's wide open, herbicide spray, log cut on, and I was sitting on the outside of it, kind of downwind of that scrape. But I'd get the small bucks and some good bucks that would come out and hit that in daylight. But for the most part, the big ones that I would see would be skirting back in the beech brush down in behind it, and liked to kind of move through there more so. Or if they did hit the scrape, they'd kind of hit it quick and work off. So I was like, all right, my best odds are to get down in there. This deer's got to be here more than I'm seeing him. So and again, this is where I didn't care what those cameras told me at that point, as far as, if he were to show up in daylight, it really didn't matter to me, because that deer's probably not going to hit that scrape 2 days in a row in daylight. That's just what I've learned. Maybe there's situations where it's different, but for the most part, looking at the odds, it just doesn't happen. So the next cold front that was going to be coming through there was like the 23rd, 24th of October, maybe. I could be a little bit wrong on that, but I wanted to hunt a little bit in the evenings. I was catching up on some work and doing things in the mornings, but I hunted a different area just because the weather conditions weren't great. But there was a big 8-point in this other spot that I knew was old, and I really wanted to target him. And I felt like I knew where this deer lived at. Like, I found so much good sign in the springtime that was like, I had him marked in Spartan Forge. Come back here towards late October. There's doe bedding that was nearby, and I'd found where there was a bunch of rubs down in this thick cover, and this buck was actually bedding down low and coming up to feed in this cut. And there was a huge cut, and most of it was herbicide sprayed, but there was one corner of it that was not sprayed. So there was both beech brush and blackberry briars. They love feeding those blackberry briars that was there. So I was like, okay, that's where the deer want to get to. So I went in there the one evening. It was October 22nd, I think. And I accessed from this drain down below, and I popped up on the bank, and I got set up in this corner. I was actually going to set up in the creek bottom. There was a bunch of trails across there, and I had this thought in my mind that if this deer is going to access this cut before it's light, especially when it's this warm, one, I got to be close to bedding, and two, he's probably going to want those thermals to be pulling down and in his favor before he hops up off of the bank and works up into this cut. Well, I got down there. It was pretty loud. The leaves were loud, crunchy, hard to get in. But I did end up, I went against what I was going to do, and I went up on the bank. And I only set up 15 yards away from where I was originally planning. But that, I believe, cost me that deer that night. So I had some does come out and go out to start feeding a couple does, maybe 30 minutes before it was getting dark, 45 minutes before it was getting dark. And then all of a sudden I hear down in that bottom, I just hear brr, brr, just grunting coming, just a real deep grunt. I'm like, holy cow. And then I heard some like lighter, younger type grunts, and I'm like, there's multiple bucks in there, and they're coming up. And at this point it's getting like down to last light, legal shooting light. I probably still had 10 minutes left at that point, but it was honestly almost too dark to shoot at that point, even though there was still time left, just the way that the canopy was. And I could hear them, and I knew they were within probably 40 yards of me, but I couldn't see them. Now, if I would have been in that bottom, I think it would have been good. But the problem was, I don't know if I would have gotten away with those thermals pulling down if they were right in the ditch. I don't know if they were on the side, if they were in it. I really don't know. But nonetheless, it starts to get dark on me, and I'm like, crap, they're all around me. I can hear them raking trees, doing a bunch of stuff. And I sat there for an hour and a half after it was dark before I could even think about getting down. And at that point, that deer was still there. And I played coyote sounds on my phone, trying to get him to spook off. Nothing was working. And finally I was like, I'm going to try to sneak down. So I'm coming down the tree. I got my red light on, and my Timber Ninja sticks are carbon fiber. I hit two of them together by accident, and they sound like rattling antlers. Well, as soon as those touched together and it made that noise, that buck snort wheezed at me, and I'm like, oh boy. I'm like, and he starts kind of like running towards my tree. And so after a little bit there, finally I ended up turning my headlamp on and kind of making some noise and just getting out of there. But this was where there was another lesson. I've talked about this before. I did a Q&A last year on headlamps and red light, white light, all that stuff. And I truly don't believe it matters when it's a ways after dark. Now, gray light and getting close to getting light or just after dark, I think it does matter. But when it's fully dark out, those deer don't really seem to be spooked. They have the advantage at that point. So I was going through and walking out. I didn't want to go the direction the bucks did, and they didn't end up, going up into the cut. They went up on the other hill. And so I walked out through the cut, even though that's where the does were. But I was like, you know what? Like, this is the lesser of two evils, spooking these does. So I walked through it, and I walked within 20 yards of a few of those does and didn't spook, nothing. Let me walk right past them. I just didn't stop. I just walked at a normal speed, wasn't sneaking anything, got out of there. So that was a really awesome experience. But the next day I was deciding I was going in to hunt the giant that I had picked up on camera there. And I went in and I hunted them at about 8 o'clock in the morning. I had two does come down the edge of the cut, went right past me, about 18 yards. I was like, perfect. And they were, I was set up probably 60 yards from the scrape I told you about that I was hunting before. And the does went down below it. And then here comes a spike. He goes down the same trail. Well, I don't know, probably about 8:30. Then all of a sudden I see one of those does getting chased out in the middle of the wide open cut by a small 8-pointer, just getting ran around everywhere. He's grunting, having a grand old time. And about 8:45, I hear some noise coming through the wide open cut. And I look up and there's two big bucks, including the one giant, and then one other one that was a shooter as well. And the big one is chasing the less big of the two down towards me. They run to just inside 50 yards, and the big one postures up to the other one, snort wheezes at him, and then kind of walks off, and he's heading towards this wood line that if he got in there, I wouldn't have a shot opportunity. He hit one spot, and it happened so fast, so I didn't have time to range it or anything, which I did pre-range trees, and this is where I had this was completely my fault, but I thought that the buck was at 35 yards. So I drew back and I put my 25-yard pin up high, and my second pin, just the way that it works on that dialed sight with the speed of my bow, my first pin's 25, my second one's 42. I wish that gap was a little tighter, but it isn't. So I kind of gapped the two there and felt super steady, solid, and I shot, and I watched the arrow, my lighted knock, I watched it go right underneath his chest. No, didn't hit him, and just underneath him. And I'm like, crap. And he didn't know what happened. He kind of jumped back. So I grabbed another arrow, but the other buck saw me, grabbed the other arrow and blew at me and took off. And then he followed that other deer and they ran out. And I was just sick to myself. I ranged it and it was 42 yards, which is exactly what my second pin was. And what really irritates me about what I did there was I'd pre-ranged that tree that he was standing next to 3 times that morning. And I just didn't remember it in that heat of the moment, which can happen. I'm glad that, it was a clean miss and everything there, but a few inches higher and would have had a dead buck and the biggest deer of my life. But nonetheless, that one really, really stung, but just kept in it, and then had another nice buck come behind me in the beech brush. He was probably only 30 yards away, but too thick to get any shots. Work down through, and I'm like, all right. So that was it, and I think that was really it there for the rest of the day. There wasn't any action there. The next day, the wind had changed, so I set up in the same area, but I had moved probably 110 yards down a little bit, and so I was set up at the bottom here, and it was a really good funnel where there was scrapes on both sides of me, but not either that I could shoot to, but there was blowdowns there that made them have to travel through this one section. And about, again, 8 o'clock in the morning, it was, I will say one thing to note, between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning, and that mid to late October time frame was by far the hottest time that I had as far as deer movement. Nothing first thing. It seemed like 8 o'clock hit, and that's when things went off, which was a good hour after daylight. But a doe came down, and she went out kind of behind me to go bed, and then caught my wind and blew at me, took off. And I'm like, crap. So I'm still sitting there, and then all of a sudden I see antlers coming, and I could hear him walking in the leaves first, and a real nice buck. It wasn't the giant, but it was another really nice buck that I would have been more than happy to take. I knew a deer he was, and he came down, but he was on the other side of the blowdown, and he was heading right for the scrape. So, and I knew if he hit that scrape, he was likely, just the way the wind was blowing, to work off away from me versus coming to me. I don't know that for sure, but I grunted at him, and he turned on a string and started coming at me. But he did what a lot of big bucks do, is they come and they get right to the edge of any sort of opening and they stop. So I'm at full draw. He's at 22 yards, and all I can see is his guts and his hind quarter and his front shoulder and his head are, just on the edge. Just needed another step to be able to stand out. And he looked there for a while, didn't see the sound of what was coming to, and he turned around and kind of trotted off, and kind of got a little bit spooked from it, not being able to see it. And that's a problem, or that's something that's really difficult when you're hunting in places where you're not allowed trimming trees, and not being able to trim trees. You can't cut little shooting spots inside of that thick cover to be able to have it. And it is what it is. So that was a really cool encounter. And I'm like, wow, I am having the best October that I've ever had at this point. I've had two really big deer and two really good deer too, that were all inside of bow range in the last week at that point. And so I spent the next, how many days was it? All the way until the 29th. So through the 28th, hunting there. Didn't see any more bucks. I didn't really see any more deer in there. I saw one small buck. That was right. I didn't see one more small buck. But I'd switch back and forth depending on if it was southerly or northerly winds between those two spots. And and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a little bit of a break and go try something else. And I had Thomas Clements was in filming, and Alex Cote. So they were in filming this project we're working on that is going to be an awesome film that I'll talk more about later. But they were in filming, and Thomas was with me on the 29th. And I said, you know what? I said, there's another area that I haven't been in yet, but there's one really, really big buck in this area too. And then there's another couple of them that are mature, good deer that I know about. And this scrape that I was going to hunt, I had no daylight pictures, nothing on it. And up until this point, and that was fine. Like I just had a feeling it was going to turn on. There was doe bedding close by, and it was a great spot where the ridge had dropped off over. It was steep down below, and there was just about a 40-yard wide bench, and then it had a clear cut that was really thick, probably a 7-8-year-old clear cut. So I was hunting kind of right on the edge of that hill. I'd come from the bottom, hike 450 feet up the hill in the morning, climb up the backside of the tree. And so Thomas and I were sitting there, and it was going to get warm that day. It was pretty warm in the morning too, but it was going to get warm. And we had some interview film stuff that we had to do back at our camp that afternoon. So we weren't going to hunt. And Thomas said to me, he's like, hey, Beau, you know, we can hunt. He said, you can go hunt till noon, 12:30, whatever. And then we can, probably go. And I said, all right. And I kind of had it in my mind. I said, maybe, 11:30 we'll get down. Still a little early yet for, midday action going on. At least that's what I thought. And it was 11:20 and it started raining. And I looked at Thomas. I said, 10 minutes early. What do you think? You want to pack up? And he said, yeah, that's fine. So he climbs down the tree. I was going to leave my set there because my plan was to hunt it for the next 3 or 4 days and put a cycle in there. So he climbs down. I lower my bow down on the rope, and he unties it for me, moves it off to the side so I don't step on it when I'm going down. And I just grab my backpack to throw on and step off my platform, and I hear sticks just breaking, crashing, and I look up, and here comes a doe busting out of the clear cut in front of us. And Thomas said he looked up at me, and he just saw me go, there he is. And this the biggest deer that we were hunting in there comes out right behind that doe, comes in. He's probably about 30, 35 yards at this point. And then he sees Thomas at the base of the tree, but Thomas is kind of like curled up in a ball, and we got footage of all of this, so it's incredible. But he sees Thomas, but must have thought he was the doe, because he just starts walking at him going, brrr, brrr, brrr. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I can't even get to my bow because it's untied. It's moved out of the way. He can't move. He's, locked down there. I'm just sitting there. So I pulled out my phone, started videoing, and just watching this just absolute magnum of a mountain buck just walking at 22 yards. And then he can't figure out what Thomas is, so starts walking in the direction the doe went, catches her scent again, and then just kind of gets on the trail and moves off. At that point, I hurried up, got the bow tied, and pulled it up and tried calling at him, and no luck. But that was just like, I feel like I took that worse than the miss that I had, because that was such a chip shot. Just everything worked out the way it was supposed to. We just got down 10 minutes too early. But that really, really hurt. And then, so I went back in there the next day. Another guy comes in. He comes in, terrible access, has his wind blowing across all the bedding, goes in. I try whistling at him. Apparently he had a climber over there. He climbs up his tree, makes a ton of noise, gets up there, rattles for 2 hours straight, and then climbs down at prime time. So right before dark, 15 minutes before legal shooting lights up, he's at the base of his tree running out of there. I don't know if he was afraid of the dark or what, and I'm like, man, this sucks. So I put in all day sit after all day sit after that and hadn't seen a single deer. And now this gets us to Friday, November 1st, and I was sitting in the spot, and winds shifted. And I knew they were shifting midday, so I was going to have to move. And I was like, all right, what do? I need to move. So I didn't have any spots in that area for the wind that it was calling for. So I was like, I'm going to get on the ground. It's high winds. We're getting 30 mile per hour gusts. I'm going to still hunt this clear cut, get on the backside of it, and just see what I can find, carry my platform, my sticks and saddle, everything on my back. And if I find a good spot, I'll set up. If not, I'll just still hunt the rest of the day. So I'm just sneaking along, and I see a big rub snapped off and just smells like rutting buck. And I'm like, all right, he's here. When I say he, I don't know which one, but you have these thoughts in your head. And I would like to think that rub was done by the really big one, because it was higher than, it was 5-6 foot tall where there's tine marks hit, and big branches just snapped off. So something mature did that, something big did that. So I was like, all right, I'm going to cut in right here. So I cut into the cut. It's super thick and loud, hard to get through, but every time I'd make a lot of noise, I'd just grunt, and just was slowly working my way through. And I looked at Spartan Forge, and I'm like, because I was in a point where I couldn't even shoot 2 feet if I wanted to, because it was so thick. And I'm like, I got to find some sort of edge within this giant cut. And I saw where there looked like there was a line of kind of, I don't know if the cuts were done at different years or what, but they grew up differently, and it was a pretty substantial line. And so I got to that spot and started working my way through it, and I started finding deer beds, a bunch of doe beds, and then I smelled rutting buck again. And right after I smelled it, I heard sound like a couple deer get up and bump, but not like a heavy, running out of their bump. So I don't know if they actually bumped from hearing me or if they were just moving around normally. And so I kind of work up to that spot where I had last heard them, and I got to like a little bit where I could see some openings, some logging trails that came through there. I actually picked a tree, and I was thinking about climbing it and just sitting there till dark. It's just before 2:00 at this point. And I was like, no, I'm going to stay on the ground. So I did a couple grunts, and I just kind of stood there in this little spot there, this little opening. And then I hear brr, 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 and I hear grunting. It's coming closer, and I hear crashing coming through. And all of a sudden I spot the doe, and she's at 14 yards at this point. That's how thick it is. And she's kind of looking over my way. I'm down on one knee at this point. I've got, I always go with an arrow nocked when I'm still hunting. So I already had the arrow nocked. I had my release clipped on, and she's looking over my way, but just knew something looked out of place, but really just went back to then just feeding. And then I see antlers starting to come through, and by the time I saw him, he was at 10, 12 yards. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I said, that's a really nice looking buck. And I'm like trying to determine, just make sure, sometimes it's, especially when you're on the ground, you don't get in that kind of thickness, you don't get a good chance to judge deer. But I was like, that deer's got a great frame, and he looks just like a mature buck. I said, all right, I'm going to shoot him. And he's coming, feeding, and he's kind of quartering to me, working through. He could have came out the opening at 5 yards, but he stayed in this thick stuff, and he's heading towards that doe. So I saw there was like a baseball sized opening, and it's like, all right, it's going to be aligned perfect with his body. And so I drew back, and he stepped right into that opening. And when his front shoulder hit that, and I saw that he was quartering to like that, I just put it on his shoulder and, aim for behind, the opposite shoulder there. And I shot, and I watched my arrow go through clean. Didn't look like it deflected off anything. Went right through. Deer runs off. I hear a crash. But I'm like, is that a crash? Because it's just so thick, and he's crashing through this stuff. It's super windy. It's tough to hear. But I was like, man, there's no way. I said, I couldn't have missed him, and I had to have made a good shot because that's the only opening I had was a good shot. So I immediately went up to look for my arrow, which is something I don't normally do, but I was just like, it had to have happened that way. So I walk up, and I can't find my arrow at first. I'm like, what the heck? I can't find my arrow. And I should rewind back for a second. So when I was down on one knee and that buck was coming in, I had my cam rested on my knee, and I was shaking so bad that my arrow was just, rattling back and forth my rest. And I just did a post on Instagram there a week or two ago about how I have to silence everything around my rest and my riser in case arrows bumping around. And that's why. So I'm like, all right. So I took my bow off my knee and put it down because the bow was just, it wasn't making any noise, but it was moving pretty rapidly up and down on my knee. So I put it down on the ground, and so anyways, but I go up and I can't find the arrow at first, and I'm like, what happened here? And I look and I see chunks of meat on logs. I'm like, what? I said, that's not good. I'm like, wait, but I was aiming for the shoulder, so yeah, there's going to be meat, but I need to find this arrow. And he wasn't sticking out of him, so it had to have passed through him. And then I look, and my arrow was there clear as day. I just wasn't seeing it, probably from filled with adrenaline. But I grabbed the arrow, and it's coated in blood the whole way down. It does have some chunks of meat on it, but I was like, okay. So I'm like, all right, let's follow the blood trail. I'm not seeing any blood right there. And then I walk out towards the way he ran, and I get out to this little logging trail, and I'm like, looking, I'm like, no, I got to go back. I need to find blood. Take it slow. Don't rush this. I know you think you heard him crash, but don't rush this. So it's just as I turned around to go back, I look, he's piled up. He was standing, he was laying 3 feet from me. He just pile drive through. So where I hit him at was in the front side of the front shoulder, and it came out the back side of the back shoulder and just completely took out his heart. Just complete pass through. Iron will wide broadheads. I've been using those for 5 or 6 years. just incredible broadheads for that. They don't always give the best blood trails, but for things like that, you're hunting on the ground, doing like, what can you ask for? I couldn't ask for anything more. I would not be able to do that with a mechanical head. So that's just my preference on why I like to use those. But there he was laying there, and just like seeing that all come to fruition was just like, I was by myself. Thomas wasn't with me filming. He was actually with my dad that day. So I was there by myself and just really soaking in that moment, seeing that deer laying there, an awesome 10-point, just piled up, clean kill. We went 25 yards at most, maybe 20 yards after the shot, and piled up. Just felt so good. Called my dad and Thomas, and my Uncle Mike had tagged out, which I forgot to mention that in the story. He had tagged out a few days prior to that, and Mason had tagged out. So all of them came, and my brother Kurt came to come help with the recovery. And it wasn't even like a crazy far distance in or anything like that. From where my truck was, it was a long ways, but there was a road on top that I could get to pretty easily. So I had them pull up there and come in and get to relive it with them, get to have my whole family there is such a special part of it, and why I love hunting Pennsylvania during the ruts. Like, could go to a bunch of other states that maybe have better quality or better experiences, whatever it might be, but there's so many reasons why I like hunting in my home state, put in so much time there. My family's there, our deer camp's there. We get to experience all that stuff together, and I wouldn't trade that moment for the world to be able to have it and be able to get them out of there and just take them back to camp. And at the same time, Lee Ellis from Seek One came up. He was planning on starting hunting that day too, and taking his shot. He came up in gun season a few years ago and wanted to come up and try bow hunting. So he was there at camp and got to see that whole atmosphere of us having a buck down at camp and what it's like, and everyone coming in to see it and just having ourselves a good old time. And it just felt so good to be able to experience that and be able to do it. So, man, like, technically I hunted 2.5 weeks of this year, not every single day, but I hunted a lot and put a lot of time in, and to see all of that stuff happen, it's just like, man, that's probably the best season I've ever had for putting plans in place and them working out. Now, did I expect to shoot one on the ground? No, but when the conditions are given to me, that's such an effective tactic, something I've learned from my dad, who's done it a lot of times, and can be really effective if you're patient and you wait for those right conditions, either rainy or wet leaves or windy, like we had there. Like, it just can work out really well. And I'm just so excited to be able to do that. My Hoyt's been super busy this year, and I can't believe it. Like, I was getting, after I shot that, everyone was asking me, where are you going next? Where are you running to? And I was like, I don't want to run anywhere right now. Like, I want to enjoy this. And yeah, I want to experience the rut. And I'm going to, as I'm recording this, I think I'm going to go hunt in New York with Mason and my Uncle Mike for a few days, and then head down to West Virginia like I normally do, but just kind of taking a week and catching up on work, podcast stuff, everything else, and just enjoying it, and hoping that there'll be some other people calling me that need help dragging and or packing out or whatever it might be, to be there to be able to help and experience that with other people. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And I just want to, as this comes out, there'll probably be some of you that still have tags in your pocket, and the rut's still going to be going on. Just remember, like, anything can change at any moment. Be patient, but also think outside the box when the conditions are, given to you to be able to do that. But have fun with it. Don't overthink it. Try not to get stressed. It's hard to do, but enjoy it, because it is a magical time of the year, and I love hunting the rut, and I love those types of interactions and the deer being vocal and all that stuff. But I don't want to ramble on anymore with this. I feel like I got the story out, but I just wanted to say again, thank you so much to everybody that's been supporting me and the show for so long now, and being here along the way. Seeing the Mountain Buck Monday submissions coming through, especially this year, it's like, this is awesome. And seeing the methodical tactics that are going into it and the hard work and all that stuff, I love seeing that. So please send in any success stories you have to my email, bo@eastmeetswesthunt.com. And with Mountain Buck Monday in the subject line, send in your success stories. I want to hear them. I want to see them. It is, it's great. I love deer hunting. I love hunting in general, and everything that it's brought me in life. I don't know where I'd be without it. But with that said, again, thanks everybody for listening and or watching if you're watching on YouTube. But I appreciate each and every one of you. If you like the show, please share it with your friends, family, anyone that you think could benefit from it. But until next week, we will see you then. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.